right? So in this section, we're going to talk about something called the aggregate supply curve. So if you might remember when we talked about the aggregate demand curve, that showed at each price level what's the demand for goods and services. And the aggregate supply curve is going to show the relationship between the price level and the firm's willingness to produce. So fundamentally, this is going to be about production. Okay, so we're going to be talking about production. So let's go ahead and draw. There's actually going to be two of them, so let's draw them, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do. So a reminder, the x-axis has real GDP. We're talking about the whole economy, not a specific good. And the y-axis has the price level. Okay, so then we can draw our two aggregate supplies. We have one called the long-run aggregate supply, which is vertical, and then we have one called the short-run aggregate supply, which starts out flat and then gets quite steep. Now in this video, we're only going to talk about one of them. We're just going to talk about the long-run aggregate supply. Okay, so let's get to it. So long-run, this is long-run aggregate supply. That's what it stands for. So basically, this one is just equal to something called potential GDP. So potential GDP is the production when all the factors in the economy are being used fully and sustainably. Now it's not exactly a maximum production, because you can go above potential GDP temporarily, but it's sort of the highest production when you're using them sustainably. So this is the GDP, the total production when using all factors. That's like a sustainable rate. So like a sustainable rate. So, and also one thing that tends to be here is our U rate, our unemployment rate, is equal to the natural rate. Okay, so we're kind of in this intermediate territory where we still have a little bit of unemployment, but it's this kind of long-run unemployment, and our short-run unemployment is not there, so we're in the strong point of our business cycle. Okay, so we get this. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we go further. Okay, so this potential GDP, well, what does our potential GDP depend on? So this is going to be our long-run aggregate supply is going to be vertical. It's vertical. And that's because in the long run, our production depends on real factors, not on the price level. So being vertical means no relationship to the price level. That's what that means. That means no relation to the price level in the long run. So and the idea is, well, in the long run, production depends on labor, human capital, physical capital, natural resources, and technology, if you remember from the growth. Okay, and these are not depending on the price level. Okay, so just the price level going up and down doesn't change the amount of workers you have, doesn't change the knowledge they have, doesn't change the machines, the natural resource, nor does it change the technology available. So therefore, these long-run factors are just independent of the price level. Therefore, this is going to be vertical, meaning it has no relation to the price level. What I mean by no relationship, I can maybe just show it here. So it's our long-run aggregate supply. Yeah, so you're here at A, and then the price level goes up. Now you're here at B. So yes, the price level changed, but real GDP did not change. Your machines did not change, your labor did not change, your technology didn't change, none of it. Right. One more thing we need to add to the long-run supply is the relationship between this and the relation between long-run supply and, okay, so let me go ahead and draw this again. So this is our, okay, so we draw our long-run supply here. And then we can kind of label these regions. So we can call this also potential GDP. Okay, so when we're on the long-run survey curve, so at this one, we're going to have a couple of things. So one we have we're using our resources normally, and then the key resource of labor, the unemployment rate, is equal to the natural rate of unemployment. So it's equal to the natural rate of unemployment. So for the U.S. economy, depending on exactly what time period we're talking about, this is probably somewhere between like 4 and 6%. Okay, so when we're using our other resources normally, so our vacancy rate, for example, for factories and retail businesses will also be relatively low, although not super, super low. So we can kind of divide into a few regions. Now, it's possible in the short run to go above this potential GDP. So how do we go above potential GDP? Well, it's possible to go above it to some extent. We do it by, for example, we take this point A. In this area, we have super low unemployment. So how would we get to a point like A? Well, we would get there. So we would get there by one, hiring pretty much anybody who walks through the door. So at this point, the labor market's going to be super tight, and employers are going to be hiring whoever they can get. So one thing we can say, our unemployment rate is less than the natural rate. You can kind of think of it as our cyclical unemployment has become negative, because people who normally under no circumstances we're going to be likely to find a job, even they can find a job pretty easily during this time. And the other thing is we're going to use our other resources like capital at higher than a normal rate. So normally, for example, you have a factory and the factory may shut down once a week to maintain the machines, etc. Or you might only normally be running one shift and then closing down every evening in some kind of business. And then to go above this rate, we're going to have not only are we going to have super low unemployment, maybe there's going to be lots of people working overtime, and we might increase our hours of operation for our businesses. But still, we run into some point, which we can maybe put a line here. Maybe I should make it dotted. At some point, we kind of get a max. So it's possible to get above the short and average supply, but we're going to run into some kind of max at some point where we just can't go above that. Okay, now let's look at the other side. Let's suppose we're over here in some point like point B. Well, is it possible to produce less than your potential GDP? Sure, it's definitely possible. In fact, it's possible to produce nothing. If everyone just stayed home for a year and no one did anything, then we would produce nothing. Okay, so when we go below our potential GDP, we have higher unemployment. This is where our cyclical unemployment kicks in. It starts to be big. And we're also, so we are, before we were using resources at a high rate, and now we're going to be using resources at a lower than normal rate. Okay, so now this last part, when production goes below our potential GDP, we have higher unemployment. Okay, so our unemployment rate, we have higher unemployment. Our unemployment rate goes above the natural rate, and we have many unused resources. So you would see factories that are perfectly capable of producing being shut down, and not just in like one industry where this industry shifted overseas or there's a big tech change, but you'd see this in the overall economy. You'd see this overall economy, lots and lots of resources, productive resources are not being used. Okay, so both of these are possible, and in our next video we'll come back in a future video we'll come back and talk about how we end up in these regions in the short run, even though in the long run we're still expecting to be achieving our potential GDP. It changed.